Canada's sweetest export is maple syrup. Hi there, everyone. I'm Jeff, and this is Plain English, where we help you upgrade your English with stories, sometimes sweet stories, about current events and trending topics. When you listen to Plain English, you get exposure to new words and ideas. You also sometimes learn about the culture in the English-speaking world. And today is one of those days. We're talking about a big business in Canada, the business of maple syrup. And in 2021, there was a drought in Quebec, the province with so many maple trees whose sap becomes the topping for our pancakes. How would Canada deal with a shortage? It turns out there is a strategic reserve of maple syrup hidden in tanks in Canada. Who knew? This was originally episode number 424. It first appeared in 2021, but here you go, the story about maple syrup in Canada. Before we start today's story, I'd just like to remind you that the podcast is just one part of how we can help you upgrade your English skills. At plainenglish.com, you can make faster progress with active learning strategies. You can take quizzes, do activities, listen to the fast version of the audio, watch video workshops, practice what you learn, and even join a live call with JR and me. It's all about helping you build your skills to become a better, more confident English speaker. Sound good? Go to plainenglish.com to start your free 14-day trial today. Now, let's jump into today's story. Maple syrup is made from the sap of maple trees common in the far northern reaches of North America. Maple trees store starch in their trunks in winter. The starch is converted to sugar and rises in the sap during the late winter and early spring. And after it is boiled, that sap makes maple syrup, a delicious topping for starchy breakfasts like pancakes and waffles. Maple syrup is also part of Canadian identity. The red leaf in the Canadian flag is a maple leaf. Maple syrup is often sold in shops as souvenirs. I have a souvenir container of maple syrup from my trip to visit JR when he lived in Montreal. Quebec is the world leader in maple syrup production. About 70% of the world's supply of maple syrup originates in the French-speaking Eastern Canadian province. Producers drill into the trunks of the tree and capture the sap as it rises during the harvesting season. Maple trees can be tapped when they're about 30 to 40 years old, and each tree can handle up to 3 taps without doing damage. A cartel in Quebec controls the production and pricing of bulk syrup. Just as OPEC controls the production of oil, the Quebec maple syrup producers determines how much maple syrup can be produced and sold each year. But as with most things in agriculture, Mother Nature has the final say. The Producers Association can say how many taps can be installed, but it's impossible to say how good the harvest will be in any given year. To produce a good harvest of sap, trees need an alternating pattern of below freezing nights and above freezing days. The harvest season is short, typically only 4 to 8 weeks a year. In some years, production is strong. In other years, it is less strong. Last year's harvest was pretty average. However, both the 2 preceding years had been very good. The problem, though, is that more people are cooking at home during the pandemic, and worldwide demand for maple syrup was up by 20%. Without any type of intervention, the price of the syrup would have to go up due to the mismatch between supply and demand. However, the Quebec maple syrup producers maintains a strategic reserve of maple syrup in case of emergency. When properly stored, maple syrup can stay fresh for years. The stockpile contains about 45 million kilograms of syrup in various locations in Quebec. When harvests are good, some extra syrup can be sold into the reserve and stored for leaner years. When harvests are bad, the reserve can be used to increase the supply. The decision to tap into the reserve is taken by the Producers Association. This year, they decided to release about half the strategic reserve into the market this February because demand is outstripping supply this year. The reserve has run out of syrup before. In the mid-2000s, there were several bad years in a row, and the reserve ran dry in 2008. As a result, prices went up, and some places were unable to get maple syrup. In the scheme of things, this type of shortage is not a big disruptor of global commerce. However, the maple syrup producers lost customers when they ran out of product. It's in the interest of the maple syrup producers to smooth over the ups and downs in the market with a strategic reserve. Many headlines around the world said the producers were tapping into the reserve due to a shortage of maple syrup, but that's not exactly what happened. The producers tapped into the reserve to prevent a shortage. The Producers Association has said that an additional 7 million maple trees will be tapped next year to further protect against future shortages. This is not the first time that Canada's maple syrup reserve has grabbed international headlines. In 2012, someone stole 3,000 tons, about 9,000 barrels of maple syrup from the maple syrup reserve, about 10% of the total. The event is called, in French, the Maple Syrup Heist of the Century. Over 18 million Canadian dollars worth of syrup was stolen out of the reserve over several months. Thieves stole the large storage barrels, took out the syrup, filled the barrels with water, and returned them to the storage facility. 17 men were arrested. The heist, if you're interested, is featured on the Netflix series Dirty Money on episode 5 of season 1. I grew up in the American state of Connecticut, which is in the Northeast. And we had maple trees where I lived. In fact, there was a maple tree in the backyard of the house I grew up in, and I would climb it. I would climb that tree every summer. I hope it's still there. Anyway, maple syrup in Connecticut, in New England, it was just a fact of life. You could buy the processed stuff in the big grocery stores, but fresh, real, non-processed maple syrup was always available. And I was shocked to learn, many years later, that real fresh maple syrup is not available everywhere in the world. Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. But if you ever go to Canada, especially Eastern Canada, or if you ever go to the northeast of the United States, see if you can get real maple syrup. They sell it everywhere in Montreal. They sell it in all the gift shops. They sell it in the Montreal airport. But it really is worth it if you've never had it. And thanks to the strategic reserve, we'll hopefully never have to go a full year without our sweet topping for pancakes and waffles. Well, that's all for us at Plain English today. We'll be back on Monday with a fresh topic. See you then. Listen up if you speak Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese, German, French, Italian, Japanese, Polish, or Turkish. One of the most frustrating things about listening and reading in a second language is being confused by unfamiliar words or phrases. When you listen to plain English, or when you read the transcript, you probably encounter some words you don't know. When that happens, you have a few options. You can stop the audio, go look up the definition, then return to the episode, find your place, and press play again, but that's exhausting. Or you can just skip it and be confused. That's no fun either. But what if you could see the translation of the word into your language instantly without having to stop the audio, without having to look anything up? Well, you can at plainenglish.com. For each episode, we translate about 100 words and phrases from English to 9 languages: Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese, German, French, Italian, Japanese, Polish, and Turkish. And we highlight those words in blue. All you have to do is hover your mouse over the highlighted word, and you'll see the translation instantly. It works great on mobile too. It really makes listening a lot more satisfying, and it's a great way to expand your vocabulary in English. The best way to see these translations is to sign up for a free 14-day trial at plainenglish.com. During your trial, you can read as many transcripts as you like, all with the translations into your language. So sign up for your free trial today at plainenglish.com.